Let this serve as an outline of the good, for we must presumably first sketch it roughly, and then later fill in the details. But it would seem that anyone is capable of carrying on and articulating what has once been well outlined, and that time is a good discoverer or partner in such a work, to which facts the advances of the arts are due, for anyone can add what is lacking. And we must also remember what has been said before, and not look for precision in all things alike, but in each class of things such precision as accords with the subject matter, and so much as is appropriate to the inquiry. For a carpenter and a geometer investigate the right angle in different ways. The former does so in so far as the right angle is useful for his work, while the latter inquires what is or what sort of thing it is, for he is a spectator of the truth. We must act in the same way, then, in all other matters as well, that our main task may not be subordinated to minor questions. Nor must we demand because in all matters alike, it is enough in some cases that the fact be well established, as in the case of the first principles. The fact is the primary thing or first principle. Now of first principles we see some by induction, some by perception, some by a certain habituation, and others too in other ways. But each set of principles we must try to investigate in a natural way, and we must take pains to state them definitely, since they have a great influence on what follows. For the beginning is thought to be more than half of the whole, and many of the questions we ask are cleared up by it. We must consider it, however, in the light not only of our conclusion and our premises, but also of what is commonly said about it, for with a true view all the data harmonize, but with a false one the facts soon clash. Now goods have been divided into three classes, and some are described as external, others as relating to soul or to body. We call those that relate to soul most properly and truly goods, and psychical actions and activities we class as relating to soul. Therefore our account must be sound, at least according to this view, which is an old one and agreed on by philosophers. It is correct also in that we identify the end with certain actions and activities, for thus it falls among goods of the soul and not among external goods. Another belief which harmonizes with our account is that the happy man lives well and does well, for we have practically defined happiness as a sort of good life and good action. The characteristics that are looked for in happiness seem also, all of them, to belong to what we have defined happiness as being. For some identify happiness with virtue, some with practical wisdom, others with a kind of philosophical wisdom, others with these, or one of these, accompanied by pleasure or not without pleasure, while others include also external prosperity. Now some of these views have been held by many men and men of old, others by a few eminent persons, and it is not probable that either of these should be entirely mistaken, but rather that they should be right in at least some one respect or even in most respects. With those who identify happiness with virtue or some one virtue our account is in harmony, for to virtue belongs virtuous activity. But it makes, perhaps, no small difference whether we place the chief good in possession or in use, in state of mind or in activity. For the state of mind may exist without producing any good result, as in a man who is asleep or in some other way quite inactive, but the activity cannot, for one who has the activity will of necessity be acting, and acting well. And as in the Olympic games it is not the most beautiful and the strongest that are crowned, but those who compete, for it is some of these that are victorious, so those who act win, and rightly win, the noble and good things in life. Their life is also in itself pleasant. For pleasure is a state of soul, and to each man that which he is said to be a lover of is pleasant. For example, not only is a horse pleasant to the lover of horses, and a spectacle to the lover of sights, but also in the same way just acts are pleasant to the lover of justice, and in general virtuous acts to the lover of virtue. Now for most men their pleasures are in conflict with one another, because these are not by nature pleasant, but the lovers of what is noble find pleasant the things that are by nature pleasant, and virtuous actions are such, so that these are pleasant for such men as well as in their own nature. Their life, therefore, has no further need of pleasure as a sort of adventitious charm, but has its pleasure in itself. For, besides what we have said, the man who does not rejoice in noble actions is not even good, since no one would call a man just who did not enjoy acting justly, nor any man liberal who did not enjoy liberal actions, and similarly in all other cases. If this is so, virtuous actions must be in themselves pleasant. But they are also good and noble, and have each of these attributes in the highest degree. Since the good man judges well about these attributes, his judgment is such as we have described. Happiness then is the best, noblest, and most pleasant thing in the world, and these attributes are not severed as in the inscription at Delos. Most noble is that which is justest, and best is health. But pleasantest is it to win what we love. For all these properties belong to the best activities, and these, or one, the best, of these, we identify with happiness. Yet evidently, as we said, it needs the external goods as well, for it is impossible, or not easy, to do noble acts without the proper equipment. In many actions we use friends and riches and political power as instruments, and there are some things the lack of which takes the lustre from happiness, as good birth, goodly children, beauty, for the man who is very ugly in appearance or ill-born or solitary and childless is not very likely to be happy, and perhaps a man would be still less likely if he had thoroughly bad children or friends, or had lost good children or friends by death. As we said, then, happiness seems to need this sort of prosperity in addition, for which reason some identify happiness with good fortune, though others identify it with virtue. For this reason also the question is asked, whether happiness is to be acquired by learning or by habituation or some other sort of training, or comes in virtue of some divine providence, or again by chance. Now if there is any gift of the gods to men, it is reasonable that happiness should be God-given, and most surely God-given of all human things, inasmuch as it is the best. But this question would perhaps be more appropriate to another inquiry. Happiness seems, however, even if it is not God-sent but comes as a result of virtue and some process of learning or training, to be among the most godlike things. For that which is the prize and end of virtue seems to be the best thing in the world, and something godlike and blessed. It will also on this view be very generally shared, for all who are not maimed as regards their potentiality for virtue may win it by a certain kind of study and care. But if it is better to be happy thus than by chance, it is reasonable that the facts should be so, since everything that depends on the action of nature is by nature as good as it can be, and similarly everything that depends on art or any rational cause, and especially if it depends on the best of all causes. To entrust to chance what is greatest and most noble would be a very defective arrangement. The answer to the question we are asking is plain also from the definition of happiness, for it has been said to be a virtuous activity of soul, of a certain kind. Of the remaining goods, some must necessarily pre-exist as conditions of happiness, and others are naturally cooperative and useful as instruments. And this will be found to agree with what we said at the outset, for we stated the end of political science to be the best end, and political science spends most of its pains on making the citizens to be of a certain character, viz., good and capable of noble acts. It is natural, then, that we call neither ox nor horse nor any other of the animals happy, for none of them is capable of sharing in such activity. For this reason also a boy is not happy, for he is not yet capable of such acts, owing to his age, and boys who are called happy are being congratulated by reason of the hopes we have for them. For there is required, as we said, not only complete virtue but also a complete life, since many changes occur in life, and all manner of chances, and the most prosperous may fall into great misfortunes in old age, as is told of Priam in the Trojan cycle, and one who has experienced such chances and has ended wretchedly no one calls happy. Must no one at all, then, be called happy while he lives? Must we, as Solon says, see the end? Even if we are to lay down this doctrine, is it also the case that a man is happy when he is dead? Or is not this quite absurd, especially for us who say that happiness is an activity? But if we do not call the dead man happy, and if Solon does not mean this, but that one can then safely call a man blessed as being at last beyond evils and misfortunes, this also affords matter for discussion, for both evil and good are thought to exist for a dead man, as much as for one who is alive but not aware of them. For example, honors and dishonors and the good or bad fortunes of children and in general of descendants. And this also presents a problem, for though a man has lived happily up to old age and has had a death worthy of his life, many reverses may befall his descendants. Some of them may be good and attain the life they deserve, while with others the opposite may be the case, and clearly too the degrees of relationship between them and their ancestors may vary indefinitely. It would be odd, then, if the dead man were to share in these changes and become at one time happy, at another wretched, while it would also be odd if the fortunes of the descendants did not for some time have some effect on the happiness of their ancestors. But we must return to our first difficulty, for perhaps by a consideration of it our present problem might be solved. Now if we must see the end and only then call a man happy, not as being happy but as having been so before, surely this is a paradox, that when he is happy the attribute that belongs to him is not to be truly predicated of him, because we do not wish to call living men happy, on account of the changes that may befall them, and because we have assumed happiness to be something permanent and by no means easily changed, while a single man may suffer many turns of fortune's wheel. For clearly if we were to keep pace with his fortunes, we should often call the same man happy and again wretched, making the happy man out to be chameleon and insecurely based. Or is this keeping pace with his fortunes quite wrong? Success or failure in life does not depend on these, but human life, as we said, needs these as mere additions, while virtuous activities or their opposites are what constitute happiness or the reverse. The question we have now discussed confirms our definition. For no function of man has so much permanence as virtuous activities. These are thought to be more durable even than knowledge of the sciences, and of these themselves the most valuable and more durable, because those who are happy spend their life most readily and most continuously in these, for this seems to be the reason why we do not forget them. The attribute in question, then, will belong to the happy man, and he will be happy throughout his life, for always, or by preference to everything else, he will be engaged in virtuous action and contemplation, and he will bear the chances of life most nobly and altogether decorously, if he is truly good and foursquare, beyond reproach. Now many events happen by chance, and events differing in importance, small pieces of good fortune or of its opposite clearly do not weigh down the scales of life one way or the other, but a multitude of great events, if they turn out well, will make life happier, for not only are they themselves such as to add beauty to life, but the way a man deals with them may be noble and good, while if they turn out ill they crush and maim happiness, for they both bring pain with them and hinder many activities. Yet even in these nobility shines through, when a man bears with resignation many great misfortunes, not through insensibility to pain, but through nobility and greatness of soul. If activities are, as we said, what gives life its character, no happy man can become miserable, for he will never do the acts that are hateful and mean. For the man who is truly good and wise, we think, bears all the chances life becomingly and always makes the best of circumstances, as a good general makes the best military use of the army at his command, and a good shoemaker makes the best shoes out of the hides that are given him, and so with all other craftsmen. And if this is the case, the happy man can never become miserable, though he will not reach blessedness, if he meet with fortunes like those of Priam. Nor, again, is he many-coloured and changeable, for neither will he be moved from his happy state easily or by any ordinary misadventures, but only by many great ones, nor, if he has had many great misadventures, will he recover his happiness in a short time, but if at all, only in a long and complete one in which he has attained many splendid successes. When then should we not say that he is happy who is active in accordance with complete virtue and is sufficiently equipped with external goods, not for some chance period but throughout a complete life? Or must we add, and who is destined to live thus and die as befits his life? Certainly the future is obscure to us, while happiness, we claim, is an end and something in every way final. If so, we shall call happy those among living men in whom these conditions are, and are to be, fulfilled, but happy men. So much for these questions. That the fortunes of descendants and of all a man's friends should not affect his happiness at all seems a very unfriendly doctrine, and one opposed to the opinions men hold. But since the events that happen are numerous and admit of all sorts of difference, and some come more near to us and others less so, it seems a long, nay, an infinite, task to discuss each in detail. A general outline will perhaps suffice. If, then, as some of a man's own misadventures have a certain weight and influence on life while others are, as it were, lighter, so too there are differences among the misadventures of our friends taken as a whole, and it makes a difference whether the various suffering befall the living or the dead, much more even than whether lawless and terrible deeds are presupposed in a tragedy or done on the stage. This difference also must be taken into account, or rather, perhaps, the fact that doubt is felt whether the dead share in any good or evil. For it seems, from these considerations, that even if anything, whether good or evil, penetrates to them, it must be something weak and negligible, either in itself or for them, or if not, at least it must be such in degree and kind as not to make happy those who are not happy, nor to take away their blessedness from those who are. The good or bad fortunes of friends, then, seem to have some effects on the dead, but effects of such a kind and degree as neither to make the happy unhappy nor to produce any other change of the kind. These questions having been definitely answered, let us consider whether happiness is among the things that are praised, or rather among the things that are prized, for clearly it is not to be placed among potentialities. Everything that is praised seems to be praised because it is of a certain kind and is related somehow to something else, for we praise the just or brave man and in general both the good man and virtue itself because of the actions and functions involved, and we praise the strong man, the good runner, and so on because he is of a certain kind and is related in a certain way to something good and important. This is clear also from the praises of the gods, for it seems absurd that the gods should be referred to our standard, but this is done because praise involves a reference to something else. But if praise is for things such as we have described, clearly what applies to the best things is not praise, but something greater and better, as is indeed obvious, For what we do to the gods and the most godlike of men is to call them blessed and happy. And so too with good things. No one praises happiness as he does justice, but rather calls it blessed, as being something more divine and better. Eudoxus also seems to have been right in his method of advocating the supremacy of pleasure. He thought that the fact that, though a good, it is not praised indicated it to be better than the things that are praised, and that this is what God and the good are, for by reference to these all other things are judged. Praise is appropriate to virtue, for as a result of virtue men tend to do noble deeds, but encomia are bestowed on acts, whether of the body or of the soul. But perhaps nicety in these matters is more proper to those who have made a study of encomia. To us it is clear from what has been said that happiness is among the things that are prized and perfect. It seems to be so also from the fact that it is a first principle, for it is for the sake of this that we all do all that we do, and the first principle and good of goods is, we claim, something prized and divine. Since happiness is an activity of soul in accordance with perfect virtue, we must consider the nature of virtue, for perhaps we shall thus see better the nature of happiness. The true student of politics, too, is thought to have studied virtue above all things, for he wishes to make his fellow citizens good and obedient to the laws. As an example of this we have the lawgivers of the Cretans and the Spartans, and any others of the kind that there may have been. And if this inquiry belongs to political science, clearly the pursuit of it will be in accordance with our original plan. But clearly the virtue we must study is human. Virtue, for the good we were seeking was human good, and the happiness human happiness. By human virtue we mean not that of the body but that of the soul, and happiness also we call an activity of soul. But if this is so, clearly the student of politics must know somehow the facts about soul, as the man who is to heal the eyes or the body as a whole must know about the eyes or the body, and all the more since politics is more prized and better than medicine. But even among doctors the best educated spend much labor on acquiring knowledge of the body. The student of politics, then, must study the soul, and must study it with these objects in view, and do so just to the extent which is sufficient for the questions we are discussing, for further precision is perhaps something more laborious than our purposes require. Some things are said about it, adequately enough, even in the discussions outside our school, and we must use these. For example, that one element in the soul is irrational and one has a rational principle. Whether these are separated as the parts of the body or of anything divisible or are distinct by definition but by nature inseparable, like convex and concave in the circumference of a circle, does not affect the present question. Of the irrational element one division seems to be widely distributed, and vegetative in its nature. I mean that which causes nutrition and growth, for it is this kind of power of the soul that one must assign to all nurslings and to embryos, and this same power to full-grown creatures. This is more reasonable than to assign some different power to them. Now the excellence of this seems to be common to all species and not specifically human, for this part or faculty seems to function most in sleep, while goodness and badness are least manifest in sleep, whence comes the saying that the happy are not better off than the wretched for half their lives, and this happens naturally enough, since sleep is an inactivity of the soul in that respect in which it is called good or bad, unless perhaps to a small extent some of the movements actually penetrate to the soul, and in this respect the dreams of good men are better than those of ordinary people. Enough of this subject, however. Let us leave the nutritive faculty alone, since it has by its nature no share in human excellence. There seems to be also another irrational element in the soul, one which in a sense, however, shares in a rational principle. For we praise the rational principle of the continent man and of the incontinent, and the part of their soul that has such a principle, since it urges them aright and towards the best objects, but there is found in them also another element naturally opposed to the rational principle, which fights against and resists that principle. For exactly as paralyzed limbs when we intend to move them to the right turn on the contrary to the left, so is it with the soul. The impulses of incontinent people move in contrary directions. But while in the body we see that which moves astray, in the soul we do not. No doubt, however, we must none the less suppose that in the soul too there is something contrary to the rational principle, resisting and opposing it. In what sense it is distinct from the other elements does not concern us. Now even this seems to have a share in a rational principle, as we said. At any rate in the continent man it obeys the rational principle, and presumably in the temperate and brave man it is still more obedient, for in him it speaks on all matters with the same voice as the rational principle. Therefore the irrational element also appears to be twofold. For the vegetative element in no way shares in a rational principle, but the appetitive and in general the desiring element in a sense shares in it, in so far as it listens to and obeys it. This is the sense in which we speak of taking account of one's father or one's friends, not that in which we speak of accounting for a mathematical property. That the irrational element is in some sense persuaded by a rational principle is indicated also by the giving of advice and by all reproof and exhortation. And if this element also must be said to have a rational principle, that which is a rational principle, as well as that which has not, will be twofold, one subdivision having it in the strict sense and in itself, and the other having a tendency to obey as one does one's father. Virtue too is distinguished into kinds in accordance with this difference, for we say that some of the virtues are intellectual and others moral, philosophic wisdom and understanding and practical wisdom being intellectual, liberality and temperance moral. For in speaking about a man's character we do not say that he is wise or has understanding, but that he is good-tempered or temperate. Yet we praise the wise man also with respect to his state of mind, and of states of mind we call those which merit praise virtues.